My experience really had me get down and question everything I ever thought I knew about the nature of reality and experience. And the more one gets into near-death experiences and what they tell us, and not only near-death, but also this incredible category known as shared death experiences, which Raymond Moody has illuminated as a concept, just like he did near-death experiences. He has talked about shared death, which is where people who are physiologically perfectly normal, usually at the bedside of a dying patient, whether family or healthcare workers or what have you, their soul gets sucked along on the journey. And the descriptions of those shared death experiences are very similar to near-death experiences, to where everything that we have come to see as kind of the rock-solid basis of the material world can just dissolve away. And the deep spiritual aspect of our existence comes front and center. The me before coma, as a neuroscientist who thought brain creates consciousness, and who really paid no attention to near-death experiences, because I said, obviously, they're just the flickerings of a dying brain. Who cares? But that they're far more than that. And in fact, they're not created by the dying brain at all. They're linked to our much more substantial, conscious, eternal, spiritual being, who we are. And near-death experiencers have been telling us for decades in the modern era, and actually in the afterlife literature going back thousands of years, about a reality that is much more real than this one. And that is where I would have been lost before my coma if I had tried to explain this as a flickering of the dying brain. But it was only by paying attention to that literature, which I certainly did after my coma, after I'd recorded everything about my own experience. I dove deeply into the near-death literature and the shared death literature. And then the more I give talks around the world about all this, and I'll have people come up to me who know nothing about any of this literature, who share with me their own personal stories of near-death or shared death, after-death communications. So in fact, I've come to realize that consciousness, soul or spirit, is the thing that absolutely exists. That is what truly exists at the core of all that is. And whereas before my coma, I would have been tempted to try and tell you that, as our modern conventional scientific teaching says, that the brain, it's the physics, chemistry, biology of the brain that creates an illusion of consciousness, an illusion of free will, that in fact that is absolutely backwards. And what truly exists is consciousness, soul or spirit, and that even as modern physics is kind of in a headlong rush to tell us, there is really no material to the material world. It's vibrating strings of energy in higher dimensional space-time. The interesting thing is that it is consciousness that is absolutely essential to emerging reality. And any one of us, the only thing we truly know exists is our own consciousness. And if people had a much deeper notion of what's called the hard problem of consciousness and the very importance of consciousness, and that really consciousness presents us with a model of what we assume is this external reality. But then when you ask one, to describe more about the nature of this consciousness, it's kind of like asking a fish, what's it like in the water? We're so immersed in it, in our very own consciousness, that it's very, very difficult to separate ourselves from it. Any kind of scientific explanation of the nature of reality must begin with a far more robust explanation of what consciousness is, because it is not created by the brain. The brain is a reducing valve or filter. I think that's a better way of looking at it. And that's an idea that, of course, was gaining in popularity in the late 19th century from very brilliant thinkers, William James, Carl Jung, Frederick Meyer, and yet it kind of lost traction and lost its way in the heyday of the 20th century when science got sucked into the pure materialistic explanations, even though quantum mechanics was banging on the door and saying, wait a minute, consciousness is a far more profound mystery. You need to understand it much more deeply if you're even beginning to say anything about the nature of reality.